Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project, and thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I have a fabulous guest with me today. Her name is Debra Jones. She is an award-winning alternative health professional with over 20 years experience and a deep desire to help people be their best selves and live their best lives. She is the author of the book titled The Successful Healer, founder of Red Tent Ontario, and host of the Own the Gray podcast, which helps listeners reframe aging and empower those over 50 to live a healthy, vibrant life. And I am honored to say that I was recently a guest on her fabulous podcast, and now she is returning the favor and giving me the honor of being here on the FemiNinja Project. So, Debra, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for the wonderful intro. And it is different. The shoe's on the other foot this time around. So we'll see. We get to give and take, right?
Right. And it is a completely different experience when you're on the other end of the microphone. But you're just such a wonderful person. You have so much wisdom and insight. And I just loved being a guest on your show. And I just thought that you would be a perfect fit for mine. So tell us how you got into the field of alternative health and healing in the first place.
Well, it started 20 years ago when actually just after my son was born. And he was about 8 weeks old, and life threw me a curveball. And I found myself needing to escape an abusive marriage. And I was a single parent. I had no money, no credit, no assets, no nothing. And it was a very, very, very stressful time. And I had to start making some choices. Where was I going to live? And what was I going to do to make money to support myself and my son? And I went to, I was really struggling. So I went to an energy healer for some emotional support. And it was a life-changing experience for me. I'd never experienced anything like that. I didn't even know it existed. It just kind of fell in my lap. Anyway, what happened was she identified that it was me feeling that I had no power, that why my life was feeling so awful, and why things were going the way they were going. And so what she did was she did some energy work, but she gave me a mantra. And the mantra was I forget what it is now, and leaving
However, whatever the mantra was, apparently it was highly effective and it worked.
Highly effective. It was this: no one can take your power without your permission. That was one thing that I recognized. But she basically gave me my power back. And after that, I thought to myself, that is an amazing person with an amazing job. That is something that if I were to change my life, I would want to make a difference the way she made a difference in my life. So that sort of started the ball rolling. And my profession at the time was interior decorating. And so I had an interest in feng shui at the time. And I thought there's a correlation there. So I learned about energy within a home and how to manipulate it and change it. And then I also realized that when I was changing the energy of the home, it mattered who was in that home. And so the personal energy of the people within the environment make a difference. So that led me to learning about Reiki. And so then I couldn't do one without the other. I had to combine earth energy and personal energy. And so that's it in a nutshell, the journey towards getting into alternative health. I wasn't brought up with it. I didn't know it existed, but it was that powerful moment of empowerment that allowed me to realize that I was in control of my own destiny if I chose it. So I could choose empowerment, I could choose disempowerment. And so that's basically what I'm doing now with all the things I've accomplished since then.
And that in itself is a powerful story. And I find with my own personal experience and with a lot of people that I talk to, it usually takes, a breaking point, or it usually takes having the rug pulled out from underneath you to realize something's terribly wrong and there's got to be another way. And that's how a lot of us who do alternative health and healing ended up in the journeys that we're in. But I find it fascinating that you were an interior designer, because that was going to be one of my questions is, well, what did you do prior to this? And I love the way that you just kind of segued naturally from doing your interior design to feng shui, and finding that correlation of the energy of the people who are in the room and in the home with you at the same time, because that can make or break a relationship. And I'm really curious, because you said your son was he 8 weeks old when you realized you had to get out?
Mhm.
That had to have been terrifying.
It was absolutely terrifying. My whole world had crumbled underneath me. And so, I look back at it, and I am very grateful for the experience. But at the time, it was a few years
Mhm.
of hell for sure.
Mhm.
There was a lot of, fear and a lot of danger in the situation that I was in.
Mhm.
But I needed to be grounded enough to navigate through it. And
Mhm.
that's what the energy healer gave me, is the ability to know that I do not have to succumb to what's happening to me, that
Mhm.
I could turn it around and make some changes, make some choices, and that those choices make or break whether you remain in empowerment, in an empowered state, or that you allow someone to take your power away from you.
So I'm really curious, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but prior to the birth of your son, did you realize that that relationship was abusive, or did it escalate after your son was born?
It had started to escalate. I was only
Mhm.
married about a year, but it was sort of at that time when I saw it all start to go downhill. But then I got pregnant, and there was that idea of you have to do it. I'm
Mhm.
married, so I have to stay married. I'm pregnant, so I have to stay here for the sake of the baby. There's all of these should do's that I grew up with having to pay attention to, right? And it wasn't until I gave myself permission to make my own choices that things started changing and going in a new direction, and an amazing direction it ended up
Mhm.
going. But it was just that feeling of I can choose to be stuck, and I can choose to kind of walk through the muck,
Mhm.
and stay there, or I can pull myself out, because no one was going to be pulling me out.
Mhm.
Although the energy healer did a good job of
Mhm.
getting me started in that way, but of course, it's our own journey, right?
It is. And making that decision to change is really terrifying. I mean,
Mhm.
it's empowering once you get on the other side, but initially it's a lot, takes a lot of courage to walk through that door and say, I'm not doing this anymore, and I'm taking another path. Did you experience that before you found the overwhelming relief, or did you feel of empowerment?
I didn't feel the empowerment until years later,
Mm.
because it was still it I didn't see it for what it was. Hindsight's
Mhm.
2020, right? You can see the situation. I didn't even know if I was going to be alive. Like there was a life challenge in that situation where I
Mhm.
looked over my shoulder all the time. And so I was just really keep trying to keep my head above the water.
Mhm.
But my son was my focus. And
Mhm.
so I thought, well, I'm the only one my son has, so
Mhm.
I better get my act together. And so
Mhm.
that's sort of what the impetus to actually make some changes. It wasn't just for me. I might have just put up with it if it were just me. And I
Mhm.
know that happens to a lot of women.
Mhm.
But it was just knowing that my son deserved better, right?
Mhm.
That allowed me to say, well, okay, it's scary, but let's jump, right? So
Mhm.
that's what we did.
Yeah, when there's another person attached that you're
Yeah,
responsible for, that really changes
right.
your perspective a lot. How long did it
Absolutely.
take before you stopped looking over your shoulder?
That would have been quite a few years. That would
Wow.
have been at least 5 years. at least, but maybe closer to 10.
Was that
So
a gradual change, or was it you woke up one day and you realized that you were either free of this influence or you were safe?
the second, it was actually a friend that showed me a perspective that I hadn't looked at before. And again, it was an empowerment piece. And, that I realized, listening to myself and the thoughts about my story, I realized that's why I do what I do. It's because I was disempowered that my purpose now is to help others be empowered, find empowerment. And so it was somebody else that said something just the right way that made me think, oh, I can look at this in a whole different way. It doesn't have to be like a ball and chain that I drag through life, with this scenario. I'm not my story. And that's something that I use a lot with my clients. You are not your story. You're so much more than just your story. And so I disengaged from my story and decided to write a new chapter. Sounds a little like
Well, I love the chapter that you started, because if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet you. And now you're doing so many wonderful things and helping clients and finding that sense of empowerment. That is probably, I think, one of the greatest gifts that you can give somebody, is to help them find their power and to get their power back. That is just, I mean, it's almost like a rebirth.
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. And the thing is, I consider myself a bridge to help people get from where they are to where they need to go, because I have a way of seeing the situation and then seeing what route is possible, what routes are possible. And I find a lot of people, when they're really disempowered, is they can't even imagine being out of their situation. When I suggest to a client, well, what would be ideal for you? What kind of scenario do you want to move towards? And they don't know what to say,
Mm,
because they're so far deep down
mhm.
connected to their story that they haven't even considered there's an
Wow.
alternative. They want an alternative, but they haven't actually started to consider it. And so
Mhm,
what I find is most empowering is just to get them to think about, okay, if things were different,
mhm,
what would that look like? That is just a very powerful thought process right there.
mhm. Does that process take a while? I mean, do some people just automatically, have the answer? Or I would imagine it would take a little bit of time and soul searching, because you lose your identity when you're a disempowered person.
I think it depends on if you're ready
Mhm,
and if that courage is there
mhm,
waiting with you, right?
mhm,
If you found some courage, it's faster. If you
mhm,
haven't found courage yet, it might take a while for you to make friends with courage before you
mhm,
actually make some changes. I think that's the difference there. So it
mhm,
really, there's no set way that it goes. It can
mhm,
take a while, but I find my gift is to ask the right questions. So, somebody will present their story to me, but I'm not listening to their story and saying, oh, isn't that awful? How bad is that for you? I see way beyond that, and I see what lights them up, or what brings them down. And I can
mhm.
ask certain questions that will allow them to step out of that part of the story into that new part of the story. And once they've done that, then they're well on their way. They don't really need me anymore.
And it probably makes you very happy when people don't need you any longer,
Exactly.
because you know that, right, exactly. But I mean, I know you were talking about courage, and I know that's, for our listeners especially, I just want to point out that I say all the time that there is a warrior in each and every one of us, just waiting to be unleashed and empowered. And so for those of you who are thinking, oh, I'm just not that courageous, trust me, the spirit of the warrior is in each and every one of us, especially women, and that warrior is stronger than you would ever believe she is.
Absolutely. Totally. And we just need to find her. Like,
Mhm.
no, she's there, and just allow her to come through. It's really interesting, the work that I do with energy work. It allows people to be present with themselves.
Mm.
And what I've discovered is when you are present, when you're not in your story, when you're not in the past and you're not worried about the future, when you're in this now moment, that's where the courage is, and
Mhm.
that's where the power is. And if you don't allow yourself to get into that state, how are you ever going to
Mhm.
find it?
Mhm.
Right? How are you going to find that courage? And so what I find is when I hold space for my clients to be in that state, I don't have to do anything. There's no
Mhm.
magic that I'm doing there. I'm literally just holding space for you to be here now. That's
Mhm.
where all the answers are. That's when you
Mhm.
can hear your heart, and your heart is guiding you and leading you the way. And it doesn't matter what thoughts come through that might sound very off the wall or
Mhm.
antisocial, or all these new ideas can come through when you're in that
Mhm.
state. And my advice is just follow it, because it's
Mhm.
leading you out of where you are to where you need to be. But it is that silence state, that not worrying about the story or the past or the future. That's where you find all of
And that in itself is magic. It's the own magic that you have deep inside of you.
that. Absolutely.
Wow. So now I want to hear about, you're also an astrologer. And I found that very interesting. And I'm not sure if this ties into your book or not, because I also know that in your book, you wrote the book like in the series, like the chakras. So tell us about that. I found that really interesting because I don't know a lot about the chakras. I mean, I know a lot about different healing techniques, but that's one that it was just kind of like has flown by me. And I never really, dug deep into it.
I'm glad you asked, because there's so much to know about the chakras. And the chakras, most people know their names, the crown chakra at the top, the root chakra at the bottom, and all the ones in between, and maybe the color associated
Mhm.
with it. But that's the only connection they make. I actually teach chakra practitioner training, because they are so much more than that. And what they are portals of energy
Mhm.
that your energy comes out of, and energy from outside comes in through. And depending on the health of your chakras, whether they're open and flowing or closed and blocked, is how we perceive things. So that goes back to the story of how I began when I was living in fear, is that I was seeing things through the perspective of fear. And
Mm.
once that energy uh, the energy centers that were allowing me to see it that way, got unblocked, I could then perceive things in a different way. So the chakras are ways that we perceive things. And when things aren't working well in our life, it's probably because our chakras are out of balance in some way. And they're always in balance, out of balance. There's no static state for the chakras. But my book, The Successful Healer, it was basically written for healers, but the information in there is for everybody.
Mhm.
And I realized that all of our states of awareness are connected to our chakras. So let's
Mhm.
just very briefly just talk about the root chakra and the base of your spine. And that's all about feeling safe and secure. So that again relates to my
Mhm.
story. My root
Mhm.
chakra was way out of balance at that
Mhm.
point in time in my life. And so all of the fears and worries and concerns come in when you're not feeling safe. So
Mhm.
going back to the book, The Successful Healer, when you're a healer, you have all of your doubts and all your fears, and your courage isn't there sometimes. And so the book was written to uh, start at the root chakra so that you can build a strong foundation, get rid of the fears, bring in the courage. Then you
Mhm.
can move up the chakras. So then you have movement, and then you have coming into your heart, then you have expressing yourself, and then you have enlightenment. So the whole idea is everything is a journey that follows that route. And if there's a discord in one of those areas, you got to deal with it. Then you can't get to the others. So you can't reach enlightenment unless all of these have been addressed with the things that come along with your perceptions, your changes.
I'm curious about, if you have a blockage in one of your chakras, could that also cause, what we say when you either are at ease or you are dis-eased, which leads to disease? So is
Absolutely.
that okay?
Absolutely, it's correlated because everything is energy. Right. And so they're totally correlated. So for instance, if you are untrusting of the world and around you, your heart chakra is closing up to protect you because there's a threat out there. So the idea is open that up, realize that you've got nothing to fear, realize, I mean, this is very simplistic, but just the general idea is that something that the energy is not flowing is not natural, and there is going to be repercussions for that blockage. So think of water that is flowing, and then it goes into a pocket and it stagnates, right? And what does there's no life can thrive there. It's dead, it's smelly, right? That's kind of what life is like sometimes, right? And so the idea is open something up so that the water can flow through, so that your life can start flowing again, so that you don't have that stagnancy. It's that stagnancy that creates the dis-ease, as you said.
I'm glad you mentioned the heart because when I first started my martial arts training, as you know, it was a really rough time in my life. And one of the positions, like our working stance, our working position, is that you have one hand just like over your heart, not touching your chest, but just hovering over your heart. So you're protecting your heart. And you have the other hand extended forward as if you would be like pointing at your attacker's heart. And at first I thought that was just so silly, but it took a few months when all of a sudden I realized, oh my goodness, I can protect my heart. Now I can give it more freely because I know how to protect it. It was one of those 3 o'clock in the morning, mental head smacking moments. It's like, that's incredible.
It really is. It really is. But if we're so busy with our lives and we don't pay attention to those little subtle things, that's when life can get out of hand, and we can go down paths that lead to lessons, right? And if you want to be in alignment with yourself and your life, and that dials back to the astrology part you started talking about, is astrology has been a way to connect with all that is. So they say, as above, so below. So what's going on in the cosmos is reflected down here on earth in our lives and in our experience. And so it's been used to predict things and to understand ourself and the world for centuries, for many, many years. And so it was when COVID hit and everything was thrown up in the air, right? We didn't know what side was up or what we were doing. It was the cosmos that I realized when I looked out my window is that never changes. That is always true. And it's something that I can trust and rely on. And that's what brought me back to myself and to my path when I realized that I could actually rely on something that is true, because it never lies. And so I got into, and I learned astrology. I became a certified astrologer during that time. But it's that information that I now share with people because it can tell us what our path is, what our purpose is. And if we're not on our path, whose path are we on? Why are we doing certain things? Is it because we were told we should? Is it that expectation of society or family or ourselves even? Or is it the destiny that we came here to fulfill? And so many people haven't got a clue what that is. I didn't know what that was. And it wasn't until I did the astrology on myself, I started to, oh, okay, now I get it. Right. So it gave me some clarity. And so that's what I pass on to people too now is it gives us clarity.
And I just want to take a stab at it. Maybe it's just my little snark and sarcasm coming through. But when you said the relationship, what's going on in the cosmos is what's going on down here. I'm just going to take a stab at it and say, I'm thinking it's pretty chaotic right now in the cosmos.
Well, I think personally, I think that it's showing us the way, but we're not paying attention. You're going in the other direction, right? So the answers are there, and how to get out of this conundrum is there. But this ego self that says, no, I know the way, right? I'm not going to listen to you. I know the way. That's where we're still at. So until we all wake up and realize that life could be a lot simpler, a lot kinder, a lot more loving. We're getting there, but it's a slow route.
It certainly is slow, but hopefully we are getting there. Oh, and there was something else I wanted to mention about that. Oh, yes. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are, because I have my own personal opinion, but because, we are so busy with our lives, of course, but we're getting bombarded, it seems like, constantly with information. It's a 24/7 news cycle. We all have our cell phones and our devices like glued to our hands, and we're on the computer a lot. Do you feel that really inhibits some of that ability to go inside of ourselves, that we're relying on external sources?
You said it right there. We're relying on external sources, therefore we're not relying on our internal resources. And until we do rely on our internal resources, we are being guided by something outside of ourselves. And so, yes, to put the phone down. I'm guilty too. And I had to draw myself away. It's like a drug, it pulls you in all the time. But you have a choice. And so if you recognize, if you can feel how you're feeling, the moment you're watching the news or scrolling through Facebook, whatever, if you take a moment and feel what you feel, if there's some tightness or anxiety, maybe that's not the best thing for you to be doing in that moment. So try putting it down and going outside and taking a few breaths of nature, right? Fresh air, maybe, if you're able to, and then notice how you feel. And you're just guiding yourself, right? But if you're not conscious, if you're not in this moment, if you're worried about the future, or you're reading the news and concerned about the past, you're not in this moment, and you have no power in that state. So the idea is to get back into this moment through meditation, if you're able to do that. But so many people aren't very successful with meditation. But to me, meditation is simply just not being in the past and not being in the future. Just pay attention to your breath, or look out the window, or see the birds or something like that, or the trees in the wind. That's meditation right there. And that just puts you in this moment where that's the only moment that exists anyway.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I am a multi-times failed person when it comes to meditation. I just can't meditate and do it the traditional way. But going outside and sitting in my yard, I have a huge yard, and, playing with the dogs, listening to the birds. It's just so I can breathe again. And my husband's retired now, so he's home a lot, like all the time. And he always has either the TV on or the radio on. I'm like, don't do that to me. I can't handle all that input. So if he wants to listen to it, I go outside, or I just go someplace else. The girl cave is a safe place. It's a really good, fun place to be.
But you then have chosen one thing over another, right? That you've empowered yourself to make a decision of putting up with the noise and the chaos, or escaping from it. And that is you exerting your power, and then doing the things that are self-care, right? That's, if we want to segue into Red Tent, that's what
that's exactly where I was heading. Okay, so not only are you a healer, you're a mind reader.
Actually, I am. But anyway, but the Red Tent idea was born from my own personal need to get away from the noise. So I realized that I needed something that was not in my life, but I didn't know what it was. And so with the work that I was doing when helping other people, I actually it all started when I put on these energy shares, which are like Reiki shares, but it doesn't have to be Reiki, for healers. We would do every 2 weeks. They would come to my place, and we would do some meditation and just basically, share food and enjoy nature. And it got to a point where that wasn't quite what people were looking for. Some women were wanting me to do a women's only share because they would feel safe for sharing. So that kind of sparked, well, okay, what would that look like? And there is a long story, which I'm not going to share right now, but there is a long story about the animals, the animal medicine that guided me to actually create this, because I listened and followed my intuition, etc. But it led to learning about what the red tent was. And basically, it's a place that women went once a month, red tent, because it was around the menstruation side of things. Right now, everybody menstruates at different times, so it's irrelevant in that respect. But it was basically where all the women gathered. And when they gathered, they gained their strength back. So it's basically, it filled them up. And that's what I was looking for, is somewhere where I could go to, fill up my gas tank. And that's what I saw that other women were asking for as well. So that's kind of what happened. So basically, we meet every month. It's unscripted, but it's always perfect. But it's really about sharing and listening and feeling part of a community. And that's what I saw was missing in my life, is that sense of community. It's missing in so many people's lives. We used to, live and breathe community, but that's kind of fallen by the wayside. But it's coming back. And the red tent movement, because there are red tents all over the world now, is a way of getting that community back together again.
Okay. And that was going to be my next question is, do you coach other women who might want to start a red tent in their community, in their area?
There have been 3 that have sparked off from coming to Red Tent Ontario. So it's just an organic thing that happens when women see the power of women coming together. They find a way to replicate that. And there are no 2 red tents alike. They're all run differently. Some have structure, some have no structure, like ours. But yes, I mean, it's a very easy thing to do, is basically invite some women over, sit down, and be together. That's really all you need. You don't need anything fancy.
Did you ever read the book?
No.
Oh, okay. Did you know there was a book?
I did know there was a book. There was actually a made-for-TV movie that I watched that it had a very small part of what the Red Tent was all about. The story itself is more biblical, but it was basically, that concept was the one thing that interests me, is that actually it's been going for a very long time, and it's all over the world in lots of different ways as well. But I do think that women are going to change the world, and if we come together, we can do it sooner rather than later.
There's also a book I recently read that at first I thought it was just fabulous. I mean, it was going around the dance studio, and one woman just loved it, and she gave it to another woman and she loved it and said, oh, Cheryl would probably love it. And I started reading it, and I really did initially love it, because it was about women coming together, and they had this power that they were just having, like electricity and electrical power coming out of their hands, and it was really awesome. And they were starting to heal the world until things got way out of control. And so I didn't like the way it didn't follow a path that I was hoping for, especially at the end. But it was a lesson.
Yeah. And and that's also been made into a made-for-TV movie too. It's called Power.
The power.
I was watching it, but yeah, it is, it's a subject that has been suppressed for centuries, right? Women are powerful, and I think that's what that's what I noticed with the Red Tent, because it was all ages that would come. So we had the elders, and we had the teenagers, but it was the listening to the elders' stories that really, I started to realize, wow, we're missing this.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
we actually, and that's what led to the podcast, is that elders are not listened to. They're not revered for their wisdom. That other cultures do revere them for the wisdom, but in
Mhm.
our Western culture, we kick the elders to the curb and say, you're not relevant. You know,
Mhm.
you've got nothing for me, so
Mhm.
I don't need to listen to you. But that is just so inaccurate, because there's a wealth of wisdom. And, you know,
Mhm.
listening to the conversation between the different age groups, you know,
Mhm.
usually that only happens in families, and not all families
Mhm.
are, you know, easy conversationalists for empowerment, that's for
That's an
sure.
understatement.
But in this environment of respect, and that
Mhm.
all the voices are valid, and we honor people by just listening to the words they have to say. We don't have to agree. We're not here
Mhm.
you know, to understand everyone from the same perspective. There's lots of different perspectives, but it's that
Mhm.
elder aspect in the red tent that sparked the Own the Gray podcast, when I realized that elders don't have a voice in our society, not the way we need them to be. And if
Mhm.
we did start listening to our elders, we probably wouldn't have been in such the mess we're in today.
Yes, that's definitely the truth. But you know, previously, like generations ago, we did listen to the elders. They were respected. They made the decisions. Even, you know, in researching my family history, you know, the family from Eastern Europe, there was always, you know, the elder that made the decision for the whole family. It was my grandfather lived in a house with 30 people, you know, and it was the elder that made the decisions, and everybody else, you know, went along with it. It was, you know, it worked for them. But I'm glad, and that you have such beautiful, you give me such wonderful segues. So it takes us right into your podcast. So tell us a little bit about Own the Gray, and when did you decide to start a podcast? And I'm guessing it was, okay, you just kind of explained it with the red tent. What was the light bulb moment that said, yes, I'm going to do this? Because starting a podcast is not easy.
It's not. And even continuing 2 years later is, you know, it's still work. But it's work that ties in with what I realize my purpose is. So I'll kind of back up a little bit, because what I learned when I did the red tent was that I stayed silent a lot, and listening to everybody else and letting them tell me what is there, what is true, what is right, and just having my own thoughts. And I think it's been 8 years now since I started the red tent, but it took a couple of years until I found myself actually speaking up. And that's what I realized the red tent was for many people, is an
Mhm.
opportunity to speak up without any judgment, or that what you had to say was valid. You know, that was sort of a healing moment for me. And it was the idea that I needed to speak up, that I thought, well, I need to fix this. I need to be able to speak up. How am I going to do that? So the idea of a podcast came up, and it's like, well, if you're afraid of speaking, hey, become a podcast host.
Oh, yeah, right.
When all you do is speak, right? So it's like, well, there's, you know, trial by fire, just jump in. And so it's been a healing journey for me to start to use my voice with some confidence. You know, it was a
Mhm.
confidence builder. But
Mhm.
it was that elder piece that was the spark. Like, elders don't have a voice, let me give
Mhm.
them a voice. So it was
Mhm.
interviewing those that had wisdom to
Mhm.
share, so that there's a platform for others to hear their voices too. So that's basically what sparked Own the Gray. And the title Own the Gray was really interesting, because I had around 50, when I started seeing some gray hairs come in, I was plucking them out. It's like, no, no, I don't want gray. Let's get rid of the evidence, right? And then it's like, well, it's normal, it's natural, I want to be able to be me. And so it was Own the Gray podcast. I thought, well, I've titled it Own the Gray, I better start to own the gray. So now I'm owning the gray. So I'm letting them through now.
Oh, well, good for you. I'm not. I'm owning the age, but I'm not owning the gray. So I told you earlier, I have a hair appointment this afternoon, and that's where I'm going to be. But you're healing, that healing moment that you were describing from, being able to speak up at the red tent, and having that confidence to be able to do that. And now that confidence is segueing into being a guest on a podcast, which the listeners might not realize it, but it's a whole different animal being on the other side of the microphone.
Absolutely, it is. It's nerve-wracking. Actually, it only at the beginning. It's really the story of it that trips you up. Once you get into it, it's fun. I'm having a blast. Thank you.
Well, I'm having a wonderful time too, but I always have a good time when I'm talking to you because you're so fascinating and so fun to talk to. And, you're just so empowering. I mean, I just love the way that you work with people, with women, and what you're doing to help empower them, because I really believe that, and you're talking about community that kind of we used to have it, now it got lost by the wayside, but it's starting to come back. And I think that COVID was an important part of that just kind of took away our human connection. And if we don't have each other, where are we as a society?
Yeah, that's humanity. Exactly. And it's not humanity,
Right.
and the world is going more towards artificial intelligence. So the humanity is leaving. So that's even more reason why we need to find our tribe, find our people, connect in, be with them. And, I had just prior to this, I have a meeting with someone that we just talk about what's going on for us. And it was that moment I realized that even just that sharing of ideas sparks new ideas, sparks new perspectives that can come in and help guide us in new directions. So if you're not talking with people, you've only got your own thoughts, and your own thoughts can go down all kinds of different roads. But when you're talking with somebody else, they'll say something, it'll make you think something different. Or it will, your questioning, your line of questioning takes me down a road where maybe I wasn't thinking of going. But we both discover, when two people are talking, we both discover new things. When a group of people are talking, it's amazing what can come out of that.
And that's another reason why I love doing a podcast, and why I still keep doing it after all this time, is that I meet so many incredible people and I hear so many different views. That's why I have a lot of men on my show as well. It's just so enlightening. And I really believe that when we can share our stories and be open and honest about it and not judgmental, the world is going to be a better place. But I have got to tell you this story. It's off the subject, but not really. I went to my dermatologist yesterday just for my yearly skin check. And it was only the second time I've been to him because my dermatologist had retired. A nice guy, very friendly. And, he's looking at my skin and it's like, oh, well, the bruises are from martial arts. So don't worry about those. And he said, oh, what kind of martial arts do you do? So we started talking, and he says he used to do martial arts, and, he still practices somewhat. And so we had this incredible conversation, and he told me what style he worked, what he trained in. And then he said, oh yeah. And then I trained with a man named John Giordano. And I just looked at him and I said, you're kidding. And he said, do you know him? And I said, he was on my podcast 3 years ago. This guy trained with him when he was a kid and up until the time he was a young adult. And it was so funny. I says, did you read his book? And he says, I didn't know he wrote a book. So I said, I will call you and leave a message when I get home, because I forgot the title of his book. But it was just such a fun experience that, through one simple comment and doing a podcast, this incredible conversation, just came out of it. It was really fun.
That goes to show that we're all catalysts for change, right? Every single one of us. You might not even know that you're helping somebody with what you say or what you express, but you're definitely making a difference in the world just by being out there.
And just by talking to people. And it can be a simple hello. And that sparks a conversation.
Yeah.
So, Debra, where can people find you? How could they get a hold of you? I mean, all of your links are going to be in the show notes, but I really like for my guests to be able to articulate because it just makes it a little more personal.
Well, everything's very easy under one umbrella, debrajones.ca. You'll find everything that I've been talking about there too.
I love it that you keep it so simple. Mine are all over the place. So, Debra, thank you so much for being here today. I had such a good time with you, and I really appreciate you being on the show.
I really appreciate the opportunity to speak and another part of my healing journey. Thank you so much for being part of it.
Oh, you're welcome. I know I did nudge you a little bit firmly, a little too firmly, but I just really wanted to have you on this show. And now you're going to be a guest on more shows, and the healing will continue.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Before we sign off, do you have one last pearl of wisdom to share with the audience?
I would say that realize that your choices can either bring you empowerment or disempowerment, but you always have the choice.
That is perfect. Thank you so much for that. That is really powerful.
You're welcome.
And thanks again for being here. I just can't thank you enough. I just love you. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Please share this episode with everybody you know, all the women in your life that can benefit from this information because, pardon me, it is very empowering. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.